Thank you. So I will cut short the introduction. I mean, I got already a lengthy introduction by this wonderful Lino. My research interests, by the way, are multiple. I just want to point out this. Even if right now I'm mostly focused on research related to APTs, essentially state-sponsored threat actors and threat actors that are used to do targeted attacks. So today, my talk, I believe, is a kind of particular for this conference because it's mostly about cyber threat intelligence. I haven't seen a lot of talks in the last years at this conference concerning this topic. But yeah, today we are talking about attribution, and in particular attributing domains. You know, domains are cornerstones of, I would say, most of the infrastructure that are supporting cyber operations all around the world. One of the questions I've always been asked is to attribute a domain. So the idea is you have an attribution hypothesis about a domain. In this case, this is a practical example about BlindEagle threat actor. You have this hypothesis, and you have a domain, and you want to look for confirmation to the attribution hypothesis. So the question that I'm trying to ask is, and to answer is, whether a given domain is attributable to, in this case, BlindEagle, or to a generic threat actor. In this case, how do you proceed? There are many ways of doing that, many. One of the ways I usually follow to do this type of analysis is to grab all the events related to a domain, so new voice records, new resolutions, new file communicating, putting all the events together, sort them by time, and what you get is a timeline of the domain. Now, the next step I follow is to pinpoint specific events in the timeline that, thanks to my prior knowledge on the infrastructural choices of the threat actor, are, pick up my attention, essentially. And the more leads, so the more events that are relatable to the threat actor I discover, the more my attribution confidence rises up. So that's the overall idea. This is an example. This is the timeline of, the domain I was mentioning before, and only 4 events. But when you know a bit about BlindEagle threat actor, this event, the second one, stands up, essentially. Why? Because this is a new resolution event for an IP address belonging to a Columbia Mobile ASN. And if you know the infrastructural choices and trends in BlindEagle, of BlindEagle, you will know that essentially one of the trends is all about having domains mostly hosted on dynamic DNS providers, service providers, but that are resolved by IP addresses belonging to specific Colombian telco providers. One of them is Columbia Mobile. This lead is further corroborated by a couple of additional less specific leads, namely these 2 communicating files. So this domain was found as being resolved by 2 Windows executable that are 2 instances of REMCOS remote access Trojan. Now, again, if you know BlindEagle, sorry for this repetition, but I want to stress this point. If you know BlindEagle, you know that is an operator for REMCOS. It delivers REMCOS RAT in many campaigns, together with additional many others .NET-based malware. But again, those 2 leads alone are not enough, in my opinion. Many other threat actors use REMCOS. It's an open source remote access Trojan. By themselves, they might give really little contribution, but together with the previous one, all together form a decent level of support for the attribution claim. Now, the very big question is, can we automatize this process? That's the whole topic of my talk, essentially. And we come out with a model. Don't be scared. I mean, there are little components, and maybe some words can be really weird to you, but we will go component by component, and I will explain you at my best what is happening here. Right now, what I want you to focus on is that this model the attribution model is per tractor. So we learn, we generate, to some extent, a model for each tractor we are interested in. So, and this makes sense. I mean, it's given the use case I have, because in my case, for example, I track very limited number of tractors, so it makes sense to have a different model for each of them. This model, of course, on the left side, we have the candidate domain. So the domain we want to answer the attribution question for. And the model expects a knowledge base as an input. So essentially, a body of knowledge of domains of trustworthy attribution to the tractor the model is dedicated to. And the output can be twice. It's a one single output, but it can have two values. It can be either noise, where essentially the model believes that the domain is not attributable. It doesn't seem to belong to the tractor infrastructure given the body of knowledge. Or it can be, yes, it's attributable, but in this case, the model gives you a little bit of extra information. It gives you a label. A label, it's essentially some additional information that is present in the knowledge base. We will see quite immediately what it does mean. And essentially gives you a little more context on why the model believes the domain, the candidate domain is interesting. And of course, all this model works with timelines to some extent. We will see. Essentially, the candidate domain is the timeline for the candidate domain is generated, and for each domain in the knowledge base, a timeline is generated. So the timelines are the cornerstone for the attribution engine. Now, this is the knowledge base. At the very origin, at the very start, a knowledge base is just a collection of domain we trust we believe can be attributed to the threat actor with decent level of confidence, okay? And the label is just, you see, besides each domain. Label convey some form of information, and the semantic is up to the researcher, okay? In this case, for example, we decorated each domain with a label referring to the information source we essentially grabbed the attribution confidence from. So, for example, the first domain was taken from a Kaspersky blog about GhostEmperor. This knowledge base is about GhostEmperor threat actor. Some other sources are classified. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose them, but essentially that's the idea. And those labels are the ones returned by the model when you have a positive outcome. So when the domain is considered as attributable to the threat actor. And the model will tell you, look, this domain, I consider this domain attributable because its timeline is similar to domains in the knowledge base, to the timelines of the domain in the knowledge base labeled with that label that is returned. I hope that this message was passed, but we'll go to this quite soon. And there is another use case for the labels. They can also express different levels of trust that you have in the attribution. You may have a knowledge base that contains a core set of domains where you are really sure that they are attributable to the threat actor. I was joking. And maybe you have another broader set of domain where the attribution is more, not unreliable, but you are less secure because maybe you don't trust the source or maybe for many reasons. And then your model, the model that you learn, it will tell you, look, I consider the candidate attributable, but pay attention, pozor, as the people say in Prague, pay attention. The domain is positive, but the attribution confidence I have is limited, or maybe it's very strong, depending on the case. Now, this is a very important thing. Now, actually, the model doesn't work with timelines as they are. They work with a proxy of the timelines, which are characteristic sets. So characteristic sets are essentially sets of features. Each feature is essentially a pair containing the event type and an event attribute. You can see the translation of the domain for BlindEagle that I showed you the timeline before in terms of a characteristic set. And each event might map to different features. For example, the event that I'm showing you in the slide is mapped in two features underlined in the characteristic set. And both the candidate domain and all the domains in the knowledge base are translated, their timelines are flattened to some extent in those structures, in those characteristic sets. You may wonder, why doing that? Why bother? For several reasons, a couple of them, honestly. First of all, think that we want to automatize the process I showed you before. So we don't want to do timeline alignment. We just want pinpoint relevant specific events in the timelines. And also because sequence alignment, timeline alignment is really error prone in this scenario. Why? Consider compromised domains, okay? So domains that are not registered by the detector, but they are controlled by the detector at a given moment in their lifetime. The timeline for those domains is almost completely composed of legitimate events. Maybe you can see one or a couple of events that are relatable or linkable to the detector operations or activity. In this scenario, any sequence alignment, it really pays for this huge amount of noise. Attribution-wise speaking, of course. So, and second key factor in choosing to flatten, because you understand me, when you flatten a timeline, you are throwing away some information. And when you have a machine learning pipeline, you are always skeptical, or we want to be really pay attention to not throw away information. Here we are throwing away information. So the sequentiality of the events in the timeline is essentially discarded. But the reason is we decided to do so because the cost was lower than the benefits. And an additional benefit we have here is that we can leverage and exploit a rich body of theoretical and technological knowledge, like algorithms and such, about sets. And we will see examples quite soon. Now, the very first core component of the model is the noise detector. So, noise detector is invoked, this component is invoked whenever you have a query for a candidate. So, whenever you want to attribute a domain, this component is invoked. And its goal is to essentially discriminate attributable from not attributable domains, okay? Now, there is a big problem here, and that we had to face. Essentially, your knowledge base, it's only composed of attributable domains, okay? But here, we want this component to distinguish non-attributable from attributable domains. But the knowledge base, it's only made up of attributable domains, so the model only has information about one side of this partitioning, okay? In other words, what happens in practical terms? In practical terms, it happens that the model, without this component, might believe that a feature is really relevant because it's shared by all for example, all the domain in the knowledge base. But it doesn't know that maybe this feature is really also really heavily represented in non-attributable domains. And therefore, if it relies the attribution on those features, the final outcomes will be compromised. This will affect the performance of the attribution. So this is a well-known problem. It's called out-of-distribution detection problem. And the noise detector tries to, it's our answer to try to mitigate this issue. How? We implement this noise detector as a mean hash index. So I'm not going into details of what is a mean hash index. It's also not, it's a well-known technology if you are from data mining field, but in general terms, a mean hash index, it's a data structure that is based on sets. So it's a data structure that contains sets and answer set similarity queries. So you may ask to this mean hash index, look, I have a set that in this case will be, of course, the characteristic sets, and he will tell you how many domains in the knowledge base are similar to the characteristic set you provided. And when I say similar, I'm talking about the Jacquard similarity, which is a very popular metric for assessing similarity between sets. It's an overlap measure, okay? So if two sets are equal, the Jacquard similarity will be 1. And if they are totally disjoint, it will be 0, with all the intermediate value you can have. And why mean-hash index are so effective in answering similarity queries? Because of their nice property, which is kind of magic, that essentially the probability of having a conflict, so of two sets having the same mean hash, is equal to the Jacquard probability. And why this feature, this characteristic, this property is important? For one single reason. You know, when you ask a similarity query to a mean-hash index, you don't need to compute intersection and unions for the Jacquard similarity, which are very heavy operations. You can just work on the hashes space, and this is really effective. It increases speeds and performance. Now, the second component, KNN labeler. So this second component is only invoked in positive cases. So whenever the noise detector returns non-noise. So we have a candidate that is interesting, it's attributable, and now we want to attach to it the right label, okay? Because this is part of the output we want. How it does? I mean, it's a KNN neighborhood approach. KNN is a popular, really popular algorithm in machine learning. In this graph, you can see every circle is a representation of a candidate, of a characteristic set. You have the candidate labeled with C, and we have two labels, L1 and L2. Now, what the KNN works with, defines the concept of neighborhood. You give a candidate domain, and it looks for the three closest characteristic sets in the knowledge base to the candidate. In this case, we have a neighborhood of size 3, but the key parameters, so the size of the neighborhood is, of course, configurable. It's one of the parameters of the model. And to attach the label to the candidate, essentially, the KNN approach goes by majority voting on the labels in the neighborhood. So in this case, the neighborhood is composed of three characteristic sets. Two of them, the majority, are labeled with L1. So the candidate will be labeled with L1 as well, as a consequence. So this is how the label is attached. Really, no rocket science here. However, there is a problem. Remember, we want to pinpoint relevant features in the timeline. If you let your KNN component work with full features, all the features in the characteristic sets, you might end up with some errors. Why? Because not all the features are equally relevant when you want to assess, also to attach a label. There are features that are more relevant, and there are features that only introduce noise and pollute the performance downwards. So what we did is, we had to implement a feature selection procedure. So essentially, we wanted to select the most relevant features in discriminating among the various labels in the training data, in the knowledge base. We used the random forest. It's another machine learning, very popular tool. It's an ensemble method, so essentially you have it's composed of many decision trees. You can decide how many. And when you have a candidate you want to classify, essentially you provide the characteristic set to all the decision trees. Those decision trees are learned randomly on a random portion of the data, essentially. And you collect all the individual trees classifications, and once again you go by majority voting. And then the final classification is produced. Now, we used the random forest classifier just for one thing. We wanted to have to estimate the feature importance, which is a feature of this classifier. And what is feature importance? In a nutshell, feature importance is essentially a score that essentially denotes how the contribution of each feature in all the trees in the classification decision. So we use the feature importance as a proxy of feature relevance. And we rank all the features in our knowledge base by feature importance. And we selected the top ones. Now, that's the whole model, okay? Now, let's look at some examples of applications. First one, GhostEmperor. It's a Chinese-speaking threat actor. Targets mostly telco providers, but not only telco providers. We collected a data set of domains we believe are attributable to this threat actor. This is only a sample though, this is not the complete data set, it's way bigger, but it just gives you an overview. And we obtained the timelines from those domains, we obtained the characteristic set from those domains, and we trained the model for GhostEmperor. And then we collected some candidates. How? We did some hunting sessions, looking for domains sharing interesting characteristics, because we knew that there were also characteristics of domains belonging to controlled or operated by this detector. You can see the characteristic here. They are divided in two clusters. There are domains that candidates that we selected because they shared the interesting registration properties, and they also had a resolution to IP addresses belonging to interesting ASNs. Again, those are interesting because they are present also in the GhostEmperor domains, but in overall terms, if you consider the whole population of the domains, I mean, there can be many legitimate domains among them, and indeed there are a lot of legitimate and totally not unrelated domains into those collections. Another cluster contains just domains that exposed or are still exposing as certificates that were also exposed by GhostEmperor domains. We collected 1,320. Of them, only 13 were considered positives by the model, our model. And the reason was they were similar to 3 or 4, a bunch of domains in the knowledge base. One of them is mentioned down there. And we looked at the timelines of those domains. And we figured out that there were just 2 events in the timeline of the... I forgot. 12 of the 13 domains we got as positives. 12 were confirmed the true positives. So we were able to understand that they were indeed part of the GhostEmperor infrastructure. For one of them, there was no information at all. We drew the timeline of this domain. We found that it was, as the others, similar to a bunch of domains in the knowledge base because of 2 single events, 2 voice record events that are highlighted down there. We investigated the features decorating those events, and we figured out that there were a couple of features that were really specific, really specific. One specific registrar phone number and one specific Proton Mail registration email address. Later, to this discovery, that of course was not published because in threat intelligence, I mean, you need to be careful. Trend Micro, so I don't know if Mbite, Marco Balduzzi is here, but his colleagues published some information, details on a GhostEmperor campaign, and in that slide, I mean, in that talk, you can figure out that they also relied on those fields. So this information told us that we were on the right track. I mean, at least the GhostEmperor domain was relying on the right features for detecting, for attributing domains. Second use case, BlindEagle. This is my old friend. I've been tracking BlindEagle for a lot of time. It's a threat actor mainly active in South America, targeting organizations in Colombia, in Argentina, and Ecuador, mostly, but also in other countries, still in South America. Really active, really active. We assembled a dataset of only 11 domains, because we wanted to do an analysis that was related to a campaign we published about in 2024. And we wanted to find additional domains related to this particular campaign. So this is the full dataset, essentially, the domains. We draw the timelines for those domains, the characteristic sets, and we learned a model with those domains, those characteristic sets as knowledge base for learning the model. Then again, we collected some candidates, once again from threat hunting activities. Look, the leads can come, usually in my case, come from threat hunting activities did by us, essentially. But sometimes they may come from incident handling reports or digital investigation reports. So the sources are many. In this case, we collected domains that shared some characteristics. 323 domains sharing the characteristic of serving as C2 for some .NET-based malware. Why? Because this is a TTP for BlindEagle. You will always route, you hook to some TTP. And those malware, though, were exposing particular behavior. We imposed additional constraints. First of all, they were fetching a paste on paste bin, and then they were contacting a DDNS hosted domain, ST2. You may think that those constraints are really specific. In reality, it's not. I mean, there are several malware strains that show this behavior. Okay, and therefore, and in addition to that, this behavior is mostly from commodity malware and open source malware. And commodity and so open source malware, because BlindEagle, those type of malware uses, are used by many threat actors as well. So I didn't have any expectation on the number of positives. It could also return 0 positives. But in this case, out of the 300 and such candidates, we got 16 positives. 10 of them were confirmed BlindEagle domains based on public sources and also on private sources, classified sources. 3 of them were suspicious, not mentioned in any public source, really suspicious and shady domains, potentially attributable, and 3 clear false positives. Now, I don't want to focus on the 10 true positives. I don't care too much. When I use machine learning models, what I want to focus is first on the shady cases, and more important on the false, on the errors essentially, because it's there that you learn how to improve your model, not from the true positives. Let's look at the timeline of one of the suspicious domains, Iglesia linkpc.net. If you know BlindEagle, those events are quite interesting. First of all, you have a bunch of resolution to PV datanet AB ASN, which is, I mean, frequent, not a lot, but present in the BlindEagle domains, if you know the infrastructure. One that is really interesting is the 4th event starting from the top. So the resolution to a Paradise VPN IP address. Why? Because this is a clear TTP signature. I mean, it's very frequent in BlindEagle infrastructural choices. Why? Because what is believed in the community is that BlindEagle wants to gain IP addresses from VPN, for example, in this case, that are geographically located in the targeted country to have IP addresses that blend in the IP traffic, essentially. So, again, those leads seems to corroborate the attribution. Now, the false positives. Well, we investigated those false positives. All of 3 share some characteristics. They resolve those 2 IP addresses. They have all these name servers listed over there. None of those 2 IP addresses are really shady, badly reputed, but used by many threat actors. It's a signal of maliciousness. Yes, probably yes. Is a signature. Is a support for attributing to BlindEagle? Hell no, in my opinion. Again, the name servers listed over there, shared by many domains, legitimate ones as well. So altogether, those features are not telling us anything about the attribution. Therefore, I consider them false positives. But one thing I want to stress is it was super easy, given our choices in developing the model, to reconstruct the reason why the model was mistaken. And this is a characteristic that I believe is the strongest one, even above performance sometimes, when working with machine learning based tools, and also for artificial intelligence tools. Think of also to generative models that are really popular right now. You want to have models that are interpretable, that are transparent, because you need to understand when the model is mistaken, why is mistaken. There are many other machine learning techniques that are really powerful, really efficient. You think of deep neural networks. Those type of models are super good in specific tasks. But yet, then, good luck in understanding why you made a mistake, why it's giving you weird results. Good luck. You will tell me how easy it is. Third and last use case, Scatter Spider. It's a popular threat actor. It's supposed to be composed of youngsters, English-speaking youngsters. It's more than an hypothesis. A few of them got jailed recently. They do IT. They target IT personnel in the of large enterprises and startups. An interesting TTP. They tend to register domains that are lookalikes of the original domains of the targeted organization. Why it's interesting, you will figure it out soon. But if we hooked to this TTP, we collect again a dataset containing domains relatable that are attributable to this detector from several sources, classified and public, with again obtained the characteristic sets. We trained our model for scattered spider, and then what happened? In May 2025, Marks and Spencer, which is a retail giant, was attacked. They disclosed it to be attacked, and almost immediately, a few days later, rumors about scattered spider behind this detector started rising. We decided, okay, let's try to look for confirmation or deny for this attribution hypothesis. So we fuzzed the original domain, legitimate domain from Marks and Spencer. We generated kind of 6,000 lookalikes, essentially trying to emulate what the attacker did. And we looked for, we discarded essentially those that were essentially not registered. Only one of the 6,000 and such, only 150 were registered at time of analysis. And we used the characteristic sets of those domains as candidates for our model. Of those 150, 6 of them only were considered positives now, and are the ones highlighted in the slide here. Hope it's clear enough, but anyway, of those domains, one of them was super interesting. We found sufficient support for confirming, we collected sufficient confidence that it belonged to scattered spider. Why? Because essentially it passed the noise detector because considered similar to other 5 domains in the knowledge base. And the relevant features were 33. A couple of them were really specific and phone number in the voice record, and a specific resolution IP address to an Amazon host that we consider controlled by scattered spider. As a representation of the other additional 5 suspicious domains, I wanted to mention the ones that is for which we have the less confidence. Once again, to highlight the errors and the easiness that we had in overcoming the error and reason about it. This domain passed the noise check because really similar to one domain, the timeline-wise similar to an additional domain in the knowledge base. However, this domain was a kind of an outlier in the knowledge base, very different from the other scattered spider domains, timeline-wise. And it contained a lot of relevant features, 103, but none of them were sufficiently specific as in the first case. It may be belonging to scattered spider infrastructure. It can be, but we didn't collect sufficient evidence, sufficient support. So this is an example. And that's it. But before I leave the room for questions, I want to do a tribute to this colleague of mine. He was inspired, essentially, this project when we started together. He passed away tragically and quite unpredictably a few months ago. And we miss him in our team, and I wanted to make a tribute to this guy. Navin Salvan.